Get on board the Bernier bus train. Come get on board the Bernier bus train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Oh, get on board the Bernier bus train.
Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernier Bus Show. Business Insider, February 28th, 2019. Dismissing Bernie Sanders as a communist shows your profound ignorance, says one of the most influential behind-the-scenes figures in American business. Delaware is the second smallest American state by area and has under 1 million people, but it's where 66.8% of Fortune 500 companies are incorporated. The first state has become a destination for major corporations' legal frameworks, largely due to policies that result in significantly smaller tax bills than elsewhere in the country. This also means that its courts are among the most important in the United States for business, and the Chief Justice of its Supreme Court has a platform for influencing corporate law. Leo E. Strine Jr. is the outspoken judge holding that position, and he's got a lot to say about the current state of the American economy. At the recent CECP, CEO Investor Forum in New York, which focused on CEOs moving beyond toxic short-termism, Strine said that growth is largely captured by the country's wealthiest. He explained that this can only be changed on a structural level if Republicans and centrist Democrats, read neoliberal Democrats, start supporting significant changes and look to the past. He pointed to the way some Americans talk about Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who is running as a Democrat candidate. When people talk Bernie Sanders as if he's a communist, they show a profound ignorance of the market and of history, Strine said. He added that while he doesn't agree with all of Sanders' proposals, they're not actually radical from a historical or global perspective. Per Strine, Sanders is actually a centrist by the standards of some of our closest and most prosperous European allies. There is profound economic insecurity. That is the sort of thing that happened in the late 20s and 30s, 1930s, and that we overcame with New Deal democracy, which became a role model for market dynamism that was tempered by fairness for everybody, Strine said. Even Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, appointed by President Donald Trump, has stated that income and wealth inequality are diminishing the country's overall prosperity and need to be corrected through policies. Did you hear that? I didn't know that. Even a Trump-appointed Federal Reserve Chairman says that income inequality is a problem. Part of what fueled Sanders' critics who dismiss his ideas as too radical or even Marxist is how Sanders refers to himself as a democratic socialist, though he's not advocating for anything approaching the state assuming ownership of industry. Instead, he could more accurately be seen as a social democrat, someone maintaining the capitalist system while using the state to create more equitable distribution of resources. So, a democratic socialist, a socialist isn't advocating for the state to own industry. They're advocating for workers to own business. It's interesting how confused and convoluted this word gets. His proposals include significantly raised taxes on the wealthiest Americans, a higher estate tax, breaking up of big banks consolidated during the financial crisis, Medicare for all, and increased infrastructure spending. Sanders' ideology is not far removed from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal vision, and Strine suggested Americans need to shed the Cold War mindset that intensified alongside the rise of neoliberalism in the late 70s. If you read the historians on this topic and watch their podcasts, what you get is the idea that neoliberalism rose because they were first able to use propaganda to scare everyone into thinking the McCarthy way was right, the red baiting and the red scare, and better dead than red. I'm old enough to remember some of that. And so what you learn from history is that propaganda was necessary because in the time of FDR, there were two active socialist parties and one Communist Party, and they were putting the heat on the wealthy. They were making it clear that enough is enough. We're coming after you guys. And then FDR was making deals with them. FDR was not only negotiating with rich people for the money to do his programs, he was also negotiating with leftist political parties to turn the heat off as long as he could make these good faith negotiations with the wealthy. And I don't think that turned out as well as it might have. I think Bernie will do a better job than FDR did, because I don't think he will be making deals when he can organize with the organizers of labor, and if labor can get rid of its corrupt leadership. And I think that can all happen under Bernie. But after that, after he's negotiating with labor, I think he needs to run roughshod over the big money people, over the banksters. I think he could improve on FDR, even though it's fair to compare him to FDR and what he's trying to do. Why you should take a chance on the Socialist. Paul Waters Smith. If we want to build popular power, we need an organizer-in-chief. The media is trying very hard to send a certain presidential campaign down the memory hole. They omit it from infographics. They decline to report its policy announcements, like the excellent Thurgood Marshall Plan for public education, Workplace Democracy Plan, Immigration Plan, and Green New Deal. They do Cirque du Soleil-esque contortions around its strong poll results. Buttigieg in fourth, but a strong fourth, and its massive and moving rallies of working people. Meanwhile, another candidate has received a relentless drumbeat of positive coverage from the same corporate media giants who have lifted a campaign from its Indian heritage claiming DNA testing early death and breathed new life into it. Perhaps because we are suffering from electoral fatigue, perhaps because it is so hard to think clearly when we are assaulted from all sides by trivia and misinformation, many still hesitate to engage in the 2020 race. I think that's partly the reason that Bernie or Bust hasn't taken off as much as it was right in the throes of the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, when Bernie's people walked out of the convention and then media didn't cover it. Anyway, that's true even among those who would ostensibly not like to see our world burn or see our brothers and sisters become one vast army of hyper-surveyed Amazon warehouse slaves. We're definitely headed in that direction. For some of the liberal leaning, there is a sense that Bernie will fail, that the powerful and the media will squash him. So why not go with someone safer? Maybe Elizabeth Warren, or even the king of illusory safe bets himself, Joe Biden. For others, leftier or more anarchist leaning, there is a suspicion that it is folly to back any political candidacy at all. Every left politician will inevitably be co-opted by the rich or be subject to capture by the establishment, so best keep your distance. And the subtext there is best keep your yellow vest handy. I'm probably closer to those people than anybody else. But we all need to overcome our anxiety-laden decision paralysis. We need to take the risk of rejection and failure and actually back the one and only chance at a pro-labor presidency we're likely to have for a generation. We've got an incredible chance, and it would be criminally irresponsible not to take it. 5 reasons a Sanders presidency represents an unprecedented opportunity. The power of the bully pulpit is immense, shaping the expectations and visions of what is possible for working people and rich alike, and creating the opportunity for social movements to grow. So you got Bernie, he's got a pretty good pulpit now. He's got his Twitch broadcasts, his live streams. He's got huge conventions and rallies. He's definitely getting a bigger voice, but imagine what would happen from the Oval Office. Imagine hearing Bernie's ideas as broadcast from the Oval Office. Bernie 2020 is running a working-class, left-wing campaign, clearly aimed at governing from the streets, not in the back rooms of Washington or in Martha's Vineyard. 3, Sanders speaks like a good organizer and labor leader, and his proposals are universal guarantees that can serve as movement rallying cries. 4, Sanders' 2016 campaign has already proven an enormous boon to the left and changed the country in ways that offer a small preview of the immense changes that could occur if he were elected. Radical politics is not a luxury at this point in history. It is an absolute do-or-die necessity because of climate change, because of all the protests and rallies around the world, because of interventionary wars, on and on and on. Bernie's is the only candidacy that makes effective climate action conceivable. And I'll let you read the rest. It's a great article. John Cusack slams MSNBC over Bernie Sanders' coverage, calls for boycott of network. Actor John Cusack recently tweeted a video montage of MSNBC hosts and commentators attacking Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, along with the hashtag boycott MSNBC. Breitbart reports, "Be clear, MSNBC, you did this to yourself. No one made you parade neocons and neoliberal pundits to slander and smear a people's movement that you know is not radical, but a return to FDR politics." At one point during the montage, MSNBC anchor Chris Matthews blasts Sanders for just waving his arms around while talking about revolution. Another clip shows MSNBC anchor and commentator Donnie Douchebag, suggesting that a socialist candidate is more dangerous to the United States than Donald Trump. Cusack is open about his support of Sanders and left-wing politics, and he's not the only one that has noted MSNBC's treatment of Sanders. Common Dreams suggested that the moderators at MSNBC's presidential debate last week treated Sanders more like an outsider than a frontrunner, tying the alleged treatment to the network's purported anti-Bernie slant. During the debate and in the spin room, Sanders was treated more like an outsider than a frontrunner. It's part of a broader anti-Bernie slant in the liberal network's coverage, the report reads. The report also noted that 40 minutes into the debate, Sanders was clocked by the New York Times as fourth from the bottom in terms of speaking time, with lower polling candidates like Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, and Cory Booker all getting significantly more time at the same mark. Sanders was skipped on topics of unaffordable housing, white supremacist terrorism, and voting rights. He also was passed on the topic of racial justice in favor of Elizabeth Warren. FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, previously found MSNBC to be biased against Sanders via skewed polls and false claims about the Vermont senator. For example, Meet the Press, Chuck Todd showed a graphic that suggested Sanders decreased 5 points in a Quinnipiac poll when the candidate actually gained 5 points. Cusack's attack on MSNBC comes in the wake of Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang publicly calling out the network. So Andrew Yang is also making this case fairly. So that's something that I've reported on already, or I've reported on the reporting on, and it's definitely a thing. Burn notice. Bloomberg is running against Bernie, not Trump. To me, that's just a duh moment. Of course, obviously, Bloomberg is running against Bernie and helping Trump, if anything. If we know that Bezos is behind Bloomberg, but why not Trump too? Why not Trump and Bezos working together to defeat Bernie? That is not a crazy idea. Here are the clues that show Bloomberg is primarily motivated by a desire to stop Bernie and his working class movement. I have shared this New York Times article a lot. Stop Sanders, Democrats are agonizing over his momentum. It's when I started talking about David Brock quite a bit, as he is a Clinton surrogate who is working day and night to try to get people. He was behind the astroturfing on Facebook and Reddit last time when he paid people to smear Bernie. So in that article it says, some Democrats are beginning to ask, how do they thwart a 70-something candidate from outside the party structure who is immune to intimidation or incentive and wields support from an unwavering base without simply reinforcing his "the establishment is out to get me" message? Back in April, the New York Times reported that big money donors were realizing the power of Bernie's candidacy, and they were frantically working on plans to thwart a 70-something candidate from outside the party structure, as I just read. As the Bernie surge in the polls, as he surged in the polls, I would have written, fundraising and in grassroots organizing, he continues to gain momentum. The Bernie surge is happening. It's real. I've noticed it, and you're not going to read about it in the Washington Post. As this surge happens, the billionaire class's plans have now come to life in the form of Michael Bloomberg's presidential campaign. The billionaire has portrayed his White House run as backlash to Trump. Don't believe that for a minute. But Bloomberg has been an ally and friend to Trump. Indeed, only a few years ago, Bloomberg insisted that if there is anybody who has changed this city, it is Donald Trump. He really has done an amazing thing. Consider some clues that suggest Bloomberg's campaign's first and foremost mission is to stop Bernie. Bloomberg only announced when Bernie began surging. Bloomberg could have launched his self-financed presidential bid at any point, but he decided to launch it at precisely the moment polls showed Bernie posting the largest polling gains of any candidate in the race. Recent Emerson polling shows Bernie tied in the lead at 27% support with Joe Biden. Bloomberg was pressed to run by Bernie's nemesis. Bloomberg was pressed to run by none other than Jeff Bezos, the Amazon CEO who Bernie helped shame into raising wages for Amazon workers. Bloomberg is close with another Bernie nemesis, also Disney CEO Bob Iger, who serves on the Bloomberg Foundation's board. Iger has publicly attacked Bernie after Bernie successfully shamed him into raising wages for workers. Bloomberg attacked Bernie in 2016. He began floating the idea of a presidential bid just as Bernie was beginning to gain momentum in that race. At that time, Bloomberg disparaged Bernie and his campaign's challenge to Wall Street. As Bloomberg now tries to buy the election with an unprecedented television ad campaign, Bernie has offered a very clear response to the billionaire candidate. Sanders rebukes Bloomberg. Sorry, you ain't gonna buy this election. Yeah, I like that one. You can go to Ryan Nobles on Twitter, Washington correspondent. There is no question Bernie Sanders has hammered Mike Bloomberg's entry into the race, but make no mistake, his campaign welcomes the opportunity the Bloomberg candidacy provides. This was the rally in New Hampshire with, there we go.
Crowded Democratic field for president just added a new member. Today, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg announced that he is running for the Democratic nomination. Bloomberg is now one of 18 Democratic candidates in the race, and the multi-billionaire is already getting a pretty rough welcome from Senator Bernie Sanders.
We do not believe that billionaires have the right to buy elections. And that is why we are going to overturn Citizens United.
Yeah.
That is why multi-billionaires like Mr. Bloomberg are not going to get very far in this election.
CNN's Ryan Nobles is in New Hampshire, where Bernie Sanders just made those comments. And Ryan, how seriously is the campaign taking Bloomberg's edition of this 2020 race?
Well, honestly, Martin, in terms of whether or not they think Michael Bloomberg can win the Democratic nomination, they're not taking him very seriously at all. In fact, the Sanders campaign doesn't really believe that Bloomberg has a constituency from which to draw enough support to win the nomination, but instead they're attacking what they believe he represents, and that is the corporate influence in politics and how that is still a big problem. And I got the chance to sit down one-on-one today with the Sanders campaign manager, Faz Shakir, and he kind of crystallized that belief of the Sanders campaign, that they don't think that Bloomberg can win, but they want to make sure people understand what his entry into this race means.
Everyone who wants to run, come on in. The water's warm. Go ahead. Throw your hat in the ring. And if you can demonstrate you have grassroots support, good. Let's see it. Let's get out there and hustle for some votes. See how much you're committed to actually being president of the United States. Don't sit in a chair over there in some Manhattan skyrise and decide that you're going to be a president because you just put a bunch of TV ads out. That's not the way to win the support of the American public.
And what you see there from Shakiri is going to be a common theme with the Sanders campaign, this demonstration about what their campaign is all about, building a big grassroots army, a number of volunteers on the ground here in New Hampshire and in Iowa, Nevada, South Carolina, California, all these early states, and a huge base of donors. The Sanders campaign has more individual donors than any other campaign, and that means that Sanders, like Bloomberg, does have a lot of money to use, but they believe the way they've raised their money symbolizes the type of presidency that Bernie Sanders will undertake if he enters the White House. Martin, they welcome this distinction, and even though they are hammering Michael Bloomberg, you can tell by the way the campaigners responding, they don't mind at all that he's gotten into this race because it helps them drive home the key issues of economic inequality and money in politics that they think are ultimately things that Democratic primary voters care about. Martin?
Right, I get it. They see him as an opportunity rather than as real competition. Brian Nobles, thank you very much.
He does get it. That old guy gets it. Now Ryan Nobles gets it. He's working for CNN and he's telling us all about Bernie's surging. This is new. And then if you go back to this original anti-Sanders movement, you go back to this article in the New York Times agonizing over his momentum. I think you're going to see again. You just saw Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton come out of their hiding places and slam Bernie's policies, whether they mentioned him by name or not. They're calling Bernie surrogates, Russian assets, and other people on the left, whether they're allied with Bernie or not. It's so ugly to see all these neoliberal, powerful people come out of the woodwork and wealthy people come out of the woodwork. You're going to see a whole parade of Hollywood people next coming out of the woodwork. You're going to see brave people in Hollywood. There are a few of them. And I've been checking, even with CAA as their talent agency, there are some pro-Bernie people who work for that talent agency. I think you're going to see a few more people joining Susan Sarandon and fighting on behalf of Bernie. And these thought leaders, these people whose names we know, they're going to take a big risk because there's a lot of power. I believe it's threatening not only to their livelihood but to their very lives to take these risks. I don't believe that big money is going to go down without a fight. It would have been interesting to go back in time, in a time machine, and watch the negotiations with FDR and these big money people. And it would be interesting to see any connections they might have to the mob, for example. And because they did, that's not making things up. And it's interesting to see how the power, the uglier sides of it, played out then and will play out now. And that's where people who leak things are really valuable. People like Julian Assange, when they can put these messages in front of us. We need more hackers. We need more brave hackers on this, on the side of justice here, to let us know what's actually going on. Because when there's this much power and this much influence at stake worldwide, world dominance, that's what we're talking about. In all the cartoons when I was a kid, the evil villain would always say, "I'm going to control the world, ha ha ha." That's exactly what we're talking about. That's what the bad guys right now are trying to do. And make no mistake, they're bad guys. They're bad guys and girls. And that's what's at stake. And so whether we can see it clearly or not, it's happening. And it's going to be very interesting if Bernie gets closer to power, what all these machinations will do and how much of them we'll get a glimpse of as we are watching from the sidelines. Don't expect a lot of help from MSNBC, but I was encouraged to see that young reporter from CNN. I'm hopeful that, and also Newsweek. I'm hopeful about Newsweek that they will help us get the word out, especially about Bernie or bust. I would like to see Ryan Nobles talk about Bernie or bust. He seems brave enough that he might try it. All right. Well, that was a lot. The gist of it is why you should be able to take a chance on a socialist, especially when he's an FDR type one. And I'm hoping to give you lots of things to talk about over the holidays with your families who may have already bought into the narrative, the WAPO MSNBC narrative about Bernie Sanders. So enjoy. I'll see you a few times over the next week, but maybe not as often. So until I'm back in the swing again after Thanksgiving, keep on burning.
Get on board the Bernier bus train. Come get on board the Bernier bus train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back.